My father demanded I vacate my home so my sisters, wealthy, in-laws could stay in luxury. I handed over the keys with a smile, but I didn't mention the hidden 4K cameras. When they raided my late mother's jewelry box, the police arrived before dessert was served. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The migraine had been hammering behind my eyes for 3 days, a relentless, throbbing reminder of the 60-hour work week I had just survived. I was curled up on my oversized beige sectional, a heating pad draped over my shoulders, and a cup of chamomile tea steaming on the coffee table when the front door banged open. I didn't even flinch. Only one person had the code to my smart lock and the audacity to use it without knocking. "Amelia, thank God you're home, we have a crisis." My father, Frank, strode into my living room, bringing a gust of cold autumn air with him. He was wearing his negotiation suit, a slightly shiny navy blue number he wore whenever he wanted to feel important or intimidate a waiter. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't notice the dark circles under my eyes or the way I winced at the volume of his voice. He just stood in the center of my open-concept living room, hands on his hips, scanning the space with a critical, calculating eye. "Dad," I croaked, my voice raspy, "I'm sick. Can this wait?" "No, it cannot wait," he snapped, dismissing my illness with a wave of his hand. "Maya is in tears, absolute hysterics. The reservation at the Grand Hotel got messed up, something about a water main break, and Richard and Joyce are landing in 4 hours." My stomach tightened at the mention of the names. Richard and Joyce, the illustrious in-laws. Maya, my younger sister, had married their son about 2 years ago. Since then, Frank had been obsessed with them. To hear him tell it, they were practically royalty. They were old money, important people, pillars of the community. "Okay," I said, rubbing my temples. "So book them another hotel. The Hyatt is nice." Frank looked at me like I had suggested they sleep in a dumpster. "The Hyatt? Amelia, be serious. Richard and Joyce are used to a certain standard. They need space. They need luxury. They need—" He gestured vaguely around my living room, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Japanese maple garden I had designed myself. "They need this." I sat up straighter, the heating pad sliding off my shoulder. "Excuse me." "Your house," Frank said, as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. "It's perfect. Modern, clean, impressive. It shows that our family has taste. I told them you'd be happy to host them for the weekend." "You told them what?" I stood up, ignoring the wave of dizziness. "Dad, I live here, I'm sick. I'm not running a bed and breakfast." "Don't be selfish, Amelia," he barked, his face reddening. "This is for your sister. You know how important it is for her to make a good impression on these people. They cover her lifestyle. They bought them that house in the suburbs. If they see she comes from— well, if they see we can provide this kind of hospitality, it solidifies her position." "Her position? She's their daughter-in-law, not an employee," I argued, though I knew it was futile. "You're single," Frank said, dropping the card he always played. "It's just you and the cat. You can go stay at my place. Or get a room at the Hyatt since you think it's so nice. I'll pay for it." He wasn't asking, he was demanding. He walked over to the kitchen island, where my spare key fob usually sat in a decorative bowl. He picked it up, weighing it in his hand. "They land at 4, he said, checking his watch. "I need the place cleaned out, personal items hidden, fridge stocked with high-end stuff by 3. I've already called the cleaners, they're on their way." I looked at him, standing there in the home I had bought with my own money, built with my own career as a landscape architect, demanding I leave so he could play the big shot for people I had met twice. He looked at me with zero empathy, zero respect, just expectation. A cold, hard knot formed in my chest. It wasn't the first time he had prioritized Maya's image over my well-being. It wasn't the first time my achievements were just props for his ego, but something about this time felt different. Maybe it was the fever, or maybe it was the fact that he was already holding my keys before I had even said yes. I took a deep breath, forcing my facial muscles to relax. A strange calm washed over me, suppressing the anger. "Okay," I said softly. Frank blinked, surprised by the sudden capitulation. "Okay, good girl, I knew you'd see reason." "I'll pack a bag," I said, turning toward the hallway so he wouldn't see the look in my eyes. "I'll be out by 2. "Perfect," Frank said, already pulling out his phone to call Maya. "Make sure you leave instructions for the thermostat and the fancy coffee machine. Richard likes his espresso specific." I walked into my bedroom and closed the door. My hands were shaking, but not from the fever anymore. They were shaking with adrenaline. "Sure, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "I'll leave instructions." He thought he was taking advantage of his pushover daughter. He thought he was securing a luxury weekend for the important people. But the betrayal cut deeper than just the inconvenience. It was the total erasure of my boundaries. As I pulled my suitcase from the closet, I looked up at the smoke detector in the corner of the ceiling. It blinked once, a tiny, imperceptible red light. He didn't know. I checked into a budget motel 3 towns over. It wasn't the Hyatt, and I certainly didn't go to my father's house. I needed to be somewhere where no one could find me, somewhere sterile and anonymous where I could focus on the screen of my laptop. I had installed the security system 3 months ago, shortly after Frank had dropped by while I was at work to borrow my lawnmower and ended up snooping through my financial documents on my desk. I had never confronted him about it, I just secured my perimeter. The system was state-of-the-art. 4K resolution, motion-activated, audio-enabled, and cloud-stored. There were cameras in the living room, the kitchen, the hallways, and yes, even one discreetly placed on the bookshelf in my master bedroom, aimed at the safe in the closet. I sat on the stiff motel bed, the room smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and stale cigarettes, and opened the app. The feed loaded instantly. It was 4:15 p.m. The front door of my house opened. Frank walked in first, carrying 2 massive Louis Vuitton duffel bags. He looked frantic, sweating in his suit, checking the corners of the room as if inspecting for dust. Behind him came Maya. She looked immaculate, dressed in a cream-colored cashmere set that probably cost more than my first car, but her face was pinched with anxiety. "Is she gone?" I heard a voice boom from the doorway. Richard entered the frame. He was a large man, taking up space not just physically but atmospherically. He wore a tweed jacket with elbow patches, a costume of a country squire, and carried a cane he clearly didn't need. Joyce followed him, a woman so tightly wound she looked like she might snap if she bent her knees. She was wearing sunglasses indoors. Yes, she's gone," Frank said, bowing slightly. "The whole place is yours. Please make yourselves at home. My daughter Amelia, she's a landscape architect, very successful, she insisted you stay here. She said only the best for family." I grit my teeth, watching the pixels on my screen. I had said no such thing. Joyce took off her sunglasses and looked around my living room. She wrinkled her nose. "It's a bit sterile, isn't it? Very modern. I prefer more warmth, more history." "It's dreadfully open," Richard grunted, thumping his cane on my hardwood floors. "No privacy, but I suppose it will do in a pinch, Frank. Better than a Holiday Inn." Of course," Frank laughed nervously. "Can I get you a drink? Amelia has a very well-stocked bar." "Scotch," Richard commanded. "Single malt, if she has anything decent." I watched as my father, the man who had raised me, the man who had demanded I leave my sickbed, scurried over to my bar cart and started pouring my $200 bottle of Yamazaki whiskey into tumblers. He was acting like a servant. It was pathetic. Maya sank onto my sofa, the same spot where I had been nursing my migraine hours ago. "Daddy, make sure you show them the garden. That's the best part." Later, Joyce dismissed her. "I want to freshen up. Which room is ours?" "The master suite is down the hall," Frank said, pointing. Amelia cleared it out for you. Ensuite bath, heated floors, the works. I froze. I hadn't cleared out the master suite. I had locked the door. I had explicitly told Frank before I left, the guest room is made up. The master is locked. Oh, excellent, Joyce said, marching down the hallway. I switched camera views to the hallway feed. I saw Joyce try the handle of my bedroom door. It was locked. She frowned and turned back to Frank, who was coming down the hall with the drinks. Frank, this door is locked, she said, her voice icy. Oh, she must have locked it out of habit, Frank stammered. Don't worry, I have the master key. My heart stopped. He had the master key? Of course. He had kept a copy of the spare key I gave him years ago, before I changed the locks on the front door but not the interiors. I watched in horror as Frank produced a key from his pocket and unlocked my bedroom door. There we go, he said, pushing the door open. The master suite. Much better, Joyce said, sweeping inside. I switched to the bedroom camera. It was the one hidden on the bookshelf, nestled between a row of hardcover classics. It gave a perfect view of the bed, the dresser, and the walk-in closet. Joyce threw her handbag onto my duvet. She walked over to my dresser, running a finger along the wood. She picked up a framed photo of me and my mother, taken just weeks before Mom died, and looked at it with disdain before placing it face down. Tacky, she muttered. Then Richard walked in. He closed the door behind him. The audio on this camera was crystal clear. Well, Richard said, looking around. At least the girl has money. This isn't cheap furniture. She's an architect, Richard, Joyce said, opening the top drawer of my nightstand. She's not rich, she's comfortable. There's a difference. Does she have anything worth looking at? Richard asked, his voice lowering. Frank says she inherited the mother's collection, Joyce said. She turned and looked directly at the closet door. He said she keeps it in a wall safe, but Frank is a fool. He talks too much. He's desperate to impress us, Richard chuckled. It's embarrassing, but useful. My blood ran cold. They weren't just rude guests, they were scouting. Let's see what the architect has hidden away, Richard said, moving toward the closet. If Frank is right about the old man's debt, we might need to leverage some assets sooner rather than later. And since we're family. They laughed. It was a cruel, conspiratorial sound. I sat alone in that motel room, the glow of the laptop illuminating my face. My migraine was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They thought I was just the obedient daughter who vanished when told. They thought my house was their playground. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I wasn't the pushover daughter anymore. I was the witness. To understand why what happened next was so unforgivable, you have to understand the jewelry. It wasn't just gold and diamonds. It was my mother's life. My mother, Sarah, had been the opposite of Frank. She was quiet, artistic, and deeply sentimental. While Frank chased status and flashiness, spending money we didn't have on cars and suits, Mom quietly collected vintage pieces. She didn't buy them for their value. She bought them for their stories. An Art Deco brooch from a flea market in Paris. A string of raw pearls from a trip to Japan. A heavy gold locket from the Victorian era. When she got sick 5 years ago, pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal, Frank fell apart, not out of grief but out of inconvenience. He didn't know how to pay the bills or manage the household. I was 27, just starting my firm, but I moved back home for 6 months to care for her. I changed her IVs. I read to her. I held her hand while Frank was working late, which usually meant drinking at the country club to avoid the smell of sickness. Maya was in college. She couldn't handle the negative energy, so she stayed away, only visiting when she needed money for sorority dues. 2 days before Mom died, she gave me the heavy wooden box. Don't let Frank sell these, she had whispered, her grip on my hand surprisingly strong. He'll sell them for a quick buck to pay off a car he doesn't need. These are for you, Amelia. You're the keeper of memories. I promised her, and when she passed, I took the box. I insured it, appraised it, and locked it away in a biometric safe in my new home. The collection was appraised at over $80,000, but to me, it was priceless. It was the only piece of her I had left. Frank had asked about it a few times over the years. "Where's your mother's jewelry? We could use it to help Maya with the wedding." "It's gone," I always lied. "I put it in a safety deposit box at the bank." He eventually stopped asking, or so I thought. Now, I watched the screen as Richard and Joyce stood in my closet. Richard was not the wealthy patriarch he pretended to be. I had had my suspicions for months. During the wedding, there were whispers about declined credit cards and vendors demanding cash up front. He talked a big game about investments and offshore holdings, but his shoes were scuffed and his eyes were always darting around, calculating the value of everything in the room. Joyce was worse. She was the architect of the facade. She was the one who pushed Maya to buy a house they couldn't afford, who insisted on the country club membership, who looked down her nose at anyone who worked for a living. On the screen, Richard was running his hands along the back wall of my closet, behind my winter coats. "Frank said it was back here," Richard muttered. "He said he saw her installation guy putting it in." So Frank had been spying on me. The realization was a physical blow. He had watched me install the safe, noted the location, and fed that information to these vultures. "Move the coats," Joyce snapped. Richard shoved my cashmere coats aside, found it biometric and a keypad. "Can you open it?" "Please," Richard scoffed. He pulled a small, sleek device from his pocket. It looked like a thick USB drive. "These consumer-grade safes are a joke. I bought this bypass tool online for $50. It just cycles the electronic solenoid." My jaw dropped. This wasn't an opportunistic snooping. This was premeditated burglary. He had brought tools. I watched, holding my breath, as he held the device against the lock mechanism. There was a whirring sound from the audio feed. A click. The safe door swung open. "Jackpot," Richard whispered. He reached in and pulled out the wooden box. My mother's box. Joyce gasped, stepping closer. "Open it." He lifted the lid. The interior light of the closet caught the sparkle of the diamond tennis bracelet, the deep red of the ruby pendant, the dull gleam of the vintage gold. "Look at that," Richard breathed. "Frank wasn't lying. That's real gold, heavy." "Take the bracelet," Joyce commanded, her voice trembling with greed. "And the pendant. Leave the cheap stuff. We need enough to cover the interest payment on the bridge loan by Monday." "We should take it all," Richard said, grabbing a handful of chains. "We can say someone broke in. Who's going to know? The girl is gone for the weekend." "No," Joyce said, her mind working fast. "Just the heavy pieces, the ones that won't be missed immediately. We can pawn them in the city tomorrow, get the cash, wire it to the bank, and be clear." "What if she notices?" "She won't," Joyce sneered. "And if she does, Frank will handle her. He always does. He'll tell her she misplaced them. Gaslight her. He's good at that." Richard shoved the jewelry into his pocket, my mother's rubies, her pearls, the locket with her picture in it. He closed the box and put it back in the safe. He shut the safe door. "Done," he said. "Let's go have that scotch." They walked out of my closet, leaving the ghost of my mother behind them. I sat on the motel bed, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't crying from sadness. I was crying from rage. A pure, white-hot rage that burned through the fever and the fatigue. They stole my mother. They used my father to get to me, and my father, Frank, had served me up on a silver platter. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I looked at the time on my laptop. 4:45 p.m. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Frank. I didn't call Maya. I pulled up a contact I had saved from a landscaping job I did for the city precinct last year. "Detective Miller." I hit call. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff, familiar voice answered. "Detective Miller." "Detective, it's Amelia Vance," I said, my voice surprisingly steady given that I was shaking in a freezing motel room. "I did the landscape design for the precinct renovation last year. You gave me your card." "Ms. Vance," his tone softened instantly. "I remember. The Japanese maples are coming in nicely. What can I do for you? everything all right?" "No," I said, looking at the laptop screen where Richard was currently holding my mother's ruby pendant up to the light of my closet. "I need to report a burglary in progress. But it's complicated." "Complicated how?" "The burglars are inside my house right now," I explained, forcing the words out through the tightness in my throat. "My father let them in. He thinks they're guests. They're my sister's in-laws. But I have video evidence of them breaking into a biometric safe and removing approximately $80,000 in vintage jewelry." There was a pause on the line, the heavy silence of a professional shifting gears. "You said your father let them in." "Yes, he gave them a key, but the bedroom was locked. They used a tool, it looked like a solenoid bypass device, to open the safe." "Is that still burglary if they were invited into the home?" "If they entered a locked room and bypassed a security device to take property that isn't theirs." Miller let out a low whistle. "Absolutely. That's breaking and entering, plus grand larceny given the value. Can you send me the footage?" "Sending it now." I clipped the segment of the video, the clear shot of Richard using the device, the moment the safe popped open, the gleeful way Joyce instructed him on what to take. I hit send. A minute passed. On my screen, the live feed showed Richard and Joyce leaving my bedroom, laughing. They looked so comfortable, so entitled. "I got it," Miller said, his voice hard now. "That's damning. The tool he used, that's illegal to possess in this state without a locksmith license. We can pick them up right now." "No," I said, the plan forming rapidly in my mind. "Not yet. Ms. Vance, if they leave with that jewelry." "They won't leave town," I interrupted. "They're here for the weekend. My father is hosting a brunch for them on Sunday. If you arrest them now, they'll claim it was a misunderstanding, or that they were just borrowing it to clean it, or some other lie my father will back up to save face. I need them to complete the crime. I need them to sell it." Miller hesitated. "You want to wait for them to fence the goods?" "I want there to be zero doubt," I said. "I want them to walk into a pawn shop, sign the paper, and take the cash. Then I want you to arrest them at the brunch in front of everyone." "That's risky," Miller warned. "If they lose the jewelry." "It's insured," I lied. It was, but that wasn't the point. "I can track them. I have Find My tags hidden in the velvet lining of the jewelry box. They didn't take the box, but they took the velvet pouches inside. I can see where they go." "So okay," Miller agreed reluctantly. "But you keep me updated every hour. If those tags move, I want to know." "You'll be the first call," I promised. I spent the rest of Friday night watching them. They drank my wine. They criticized my art. They slept in my bed. It was a violation so profound it made my skin crawl, but I couldn't look away. Saturday morning at 10:00 a.m., the movement started. "We're going for a drive, Frank," Richard announced in the kitchen. "Check out the local scenery." "Take my car," Frank offered. "The Mercedes is in the drive." "Lovely," Joyce purred. I watched them leave on the driveway camera. As soon as they were gone, I opened the tracking app on my phone. The little blue dot began to move down the highway, heading straight for the city center. I threw on a hoodie and sunglasses, grabbed my keys, and ran to my car. I wasn't going to interfere. I just needed to see it. I trailed them from a safe distance, 3 cars back. They didn't go to a museum. They didn't go to a park. They pulled into a strip mall in the gritty part of downtown, parking right in front of Gold and Silver Exchange. I parked across the street, my heart hammering against my ribs. I zoomed in with my phone camera. I watched Richard get out, patting his jacket pocket. Joyce stayed in the car, checking her makeup in the visor mirror. He was inside for 20 minutes. When he came out, he was walking lighter. He was smiling. He got back into the car, and I saw him hand a thick envelope to Joyce. She opened it, fanned out a stack of cash, and kissed him on the cheek. They had done it. They had actually sold my mother's legacy for a stack of dirty bills. I snapped a photo of them high-fiving in the front seat. "Got you," I whispered. I dialed Miller. They just left Gold and Silver Exchange on 4th Street. they sold it. I'm on it, Miller said, his tone grim. I'll send a uniform to the shop to secure the items and the surveillance footage immediately. We'll have the warrant ready for tomorrow morning. Sunday brunch, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. 11:00 a.m. By Saturday afternoon, I was back in the motel room, but the dynamic had shifted. I wasn't just watching a burglary anymore. I was watching a slow-motion car crash, and I was the only one who knew the impact was coming. I needed to sever the alliance between Frank and the Sterlings. If Frank went down with them completely blindly, he would play the victim forever. I needed to give him a chance, one chance, to see the truth. I watched on the kitchen camera as Frank prepared a charcuterie board for his guest's return. He was humming to himself, arranging prosciutto with the delicacy of an artist. He looked so desperate to please, so pathetic in his eagerness. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. On the screen, I saw him wipe his hands on a towel and answer. Amelia, I'm busy. I hope you're calling to say you're enjoying the motel. I'm calling to give you a chance to redeem yourself, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through his sarcasm. Frank stopped arranging the cheese. Excuse me, redeem myself, you're the one who was rude about the guests. Dad listened to me very carefully, I said. I know they went into the master bedroom. Frank stiffened. He glanced toward the hallway, then lowered his voice. Don't be ridiculous. I told you I gave them the tour. They're just sleeping there. I know you opened the door for them, I continued, ignoring his lie. But did you know they went into the closet? Did you know they opened the safe? You're paranoid, Frank snapped, though I saw him glance nervously at the ceiling, as if looking for the cameras he didn't know existed. Nobody touched your safe. Richard is a gentleman. Joyce is a lady. They have more money than you'll ever see in your lifetime. Why would they touch your little trinkets? Because they're broke, Dad, I said flatly, and because you told them where the safe was. I did no such thing, he shouted, his face turning red. I am hanging up now. Check your texts, I said. I just sent you a video, watch it, and listen to what they say about you. I hung up. On the monitor, I saw Frank freeze, his phone pinged. He looked at it, hesitated, and then tapped the screen. I watched my father watch the betrayal. I saw his face go slack as the video played, the clip from the closet. He watched Richard use the device. He watched the safe open. But more importantly, he heard the audio I had enhanced. Frank is a fool, he talks too much. He's desperate to impress us. It's embarrassing, but useful. Frank's hand trembled. He dropped the phone onto the kitchen counter with a clatter. He braced his hands on the marble island, his head hanging low. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity. He was a narcissist and a bully, but he was also a man realizing that his heroes thought he was a joke. Then the back door opened. Richard and Joyce walked in, laughing, smelling of expensive lunch and my mother's money. Frank, Richard boomed, we found the most delightful little bistro. You really should have come. Frank turned slowly. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He looked from Richard to the phone on the counter. Did you go in the safe? Frank asked. His voice was small, trembling. Richard blinked, his smile not faltering for a second. The what? Frank, have you been drinking? Amelia, Frank swallowed hard. Amelia sent me a video of you in her closet calling me a fool. The air left the room. Joyce froze, her hand halfway to a grape on the charcuterie board. Richard's eyes narrowed, the jovial mask slipping instantly to reveal something predatory. She's spying on us, Joyce shrieked, her voice shrill and defensive. That little invasive brat, I told you, Frank, I told you she was unstable. You called me a fool, Frank whispered, the hurt radiating off him. You stole her jewelry. We didn't steal anything, Richard roared, stepping forward, using his size to intimidate Frank. We were looking, we were admiring. If anything is missing, she probably moved it herself to frame us. She's jealous, Frank. She's jealous of Maya, she's jealous of us, and she's trying to ruin this weekend because she can't stand to see you happy. But the video, Frank stammered, backing away. Deep fakes, Joyce spat, marching over to Frank and grabbing his arm. My God, Frank, use your head. You know technology. She doctored it. She hates us. Are you going to believe your own eyes and ears, the people who treat your daughter like a princess, or are you going to believe a bitter, lonely woman who installs cameras to spy on her own father? I watched, stunned, as Frank's resolve crumbled. He wanted to believe them. He needed to believe them. The alternative, that he was a fool who had helped rob his own daughter, was too painful to accept. She has always been jealous, Frank mumbled, looking at Joyce. Exactly, Richard said, clapping a hand on Frank's shoulder, squeezing hard. She's trying to drive a wedge between us. Don't let her win, Frank. Now pour us a drink. We have a big day tomorrow. Frank nodded, slowly at first, then more vigorously. He picked up his phone and deleted the text. You're right, Frank said, his voice regaining its bluster. She's trying to ruin it. I won't let her. I sat back in my chair, the pity vanishing instantly. He had seen the truth, and he had chosen the lie. Okay, Dad, I whispered to the screen. You made your choice. Saturday night was a blur of preparation. I didn't sleep. I was too busy building the coffin for the Sterling family reputation. Detective Miller called me at 2:00 a.m. He was working the night shift, fueled by coffee and the sheer absurdity of the case. You were right, Miller said, his voice sounding tinny over the speakerphone. We recovered the items, all of them. The shop owner, a guy named Stan, rolled over instantly. He gave us the surveillance tape from the store, the transaction receipt signed by Richard Sterling, and the items themselves. We have the bracelet, the pendant, the pearls. It's all tagged into evidence. Thank you, I breathed, relief washing over me. Did you run their background? Oh, did I ever? Miller chuckled darkly. Ms. Vance, these people aren't just broke. They're criminals. Richard Sterling has 3 outstanding judgments against him in Florida for construction fraud. Joyce Sterling, maiden name Higgins, has a history of passing bad checks. They're currently being sued by their HOA, their country club, and 2 different banks. They have a foreclosure hearing next Tuesday. Next Tuesday? I asked. That explains the rush. They needed the cash to stall the foreclosure. Exactly, they're drowning, and they used your mother's legacy as a life raft. Are the warrants signed? Signed by the judge an hour ago. Grand larceny, breaking and entering, trafficking stolen goods. We're ready to roll. Don't come until everyone is seated, I instructed. My sister needs to be there. She needs to see who she married. We'll hold the perimeter until 11:15. Miller confirmed. I hung up and turned my attention to the final piece of the puzzle, Maya. My sister was the wild card. She was spoiled, yes. Entitled, absolutely. But she wasn't malicious like Frank, and she wasn't a sociopath like the Sterlings. She was just weak. She believed the fairy tale because the reality was too scary to look at. I sent her a text at 7:00 a.m. Sunday morning. Amelia, Maya, whatever happens today, just know that I tried to warn Dad. Please, for your own sake, don't sign anything Richard gives you today. Her reply came 3 minutes later. Maya, stop it, Amelia. Dad told me what you did, spying on us, making up videos. You're sick, just stay away. We're having a lovely time without you. She was fully under their spell. They had circled the wagons. I showered and dressed. I didn't put on my usual work clothes. I put on a sharp black blazer, tailored trousers, and heels. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. I looked like a CEO. I looked like an executioner. At 10:30 a.m., I checked the cameras one last time. The house was buzzing. A catering crew, paid for by Frank, no doubt was setting up in the dining room. There were platters of smoked salmon, towers of pastries, and a mimosa bar. Richard was holding court in the center of the room, wearing a linen suit, looking every inch the benevolent patriarch. Joyce was laughing at something Frank said, her hand resting possessively on my dining table. Maya looked radiant but tired, clinging to her husband's arm like he was the only solid thing in the world. To family, Richard toasted, raising a glass of my best champagne. To family, Frank echoed, beaming. They had no idea. I closed the laptop. I grabbed my purse. I drove to my house, parking down the street so they wouldn't see me coming. I saw the unmarked police cruisers idling around the corner. I gave a small nod to the dark sedan where Miller was sitting. He flashed his headlights once. I walked up the driveway of my own home. The gravel crunched under my heels. I could hear the laughter floating out from the open windows. It was time to crash the party. I walked through the unlocked front door, my heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. The laughter in the dining room died instantly. Frank was mid-toast, a glass of champagne raised high. Richard was leaning back in my velvet armchair, looking for all the world like he owned the place. Joyce was picking at a croissant. Maya, radiant in a floral dress, was clinging to her husband's arm. They all froze as I stood in the archway, my black blazer stark against the bright, sunlit room. "Amelia," Frank sputtered, lowering his glass. "What are you doing here? I told you we were having a private family brunch. You weren't invited." "It's my house, Dad," I said, my voice calm but carrying effortlessly through the room. "I don't need an invitation." "You have some nerve showing your face after the stunt you pulled," Joyce hissed, standing up. "Spying on us, trying to frame us with fake videos. Frank, get her out of here." "Actually," I said, stepping further into the room and pulling a folded document from my purse, "I'm here to clarify a few things. Starting with the fake video." "We know it's fake," Richard boomed, his face flushing red. "Frank told us everything. You're jealous. You're trying to destroy your sister's happiness because you're a lonely, bitter spinster." Maya looked at me with genuine hurt in her eyes. "Amelia, how could you? Making up lies about Richard stealing? He's a good man, he buys me everything." "Does he?" I asked, looking directly at my sister. "Or does he buy you things with money he borrowed from Dad? Or worse, money he stole from dead people?" "That's enough," Frank roared, slamming his hand on the table. "Get out, now, or I'm calling the police." "Don't worry, Dad," I said, checking my watch. "I already called them, they're here." As if on cue, the front door opened again. But this time, it wasn't a family member. It was Detective Miller, flanked by two uniformed officers. The room went deathly silent. Richard's face drained of color. Joyce dropped her croissant. "Richard Sterling, Joyce Sterling," Miller asked, his voice firm and professional. "Who are you?" Richard demanded, trying to muster some bluster but failing. "This is a private event. Frank, do something." "Detective Miller, major crimes," Miller said, flashing his badge. "I have warrants for your arrest on charges of grand larceny, breaking and entering, and trafficking in stolen goods." "Stolen goods?" Maya whispered, looking from her husband to the police. "What stolen goods?" Miller signaled to one of the officers, who placed a clear evidence bag on the dining table. Inside, glittering under the chandelier, were the ruby pendant, the diamond bracelet, and the pearls. My mother's jewelry. "These items were recovered this morning from the gold and silver exchange on 4th Street, Miller stated. "We have surveillance footage of Mr. Sterling selling them at 10:23 a.m. yesterday. We have the receipt signed by him. And we have the cash, $3,000, that was found in Mrs. Sterling's purse." Frank stared at the bag. He knew that pendant. He had bought it for Mom on their 10th anniversary. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "It's a mistake," Joyce shrieked, backing away. "It's a misunderstanding. We were taking them to get cleaned, as a surprise for Amelia." "You pawned them for cash, Mrs. Sterling," Miller said, stepping forward with handcuffs. "To pay off a overdue bridge loan that was threatening foreclosure on your property in Florida. We know about the lawsuits. We know about the debts. We know everything." "Debts?" Maya looked at Richard, her voice trembling. "What debts? You said we were rich. You said the house was paid for." Richard looked at his wife, sweat beading on his forehead. "Baby, it's complicated. Just listen to me. It's a temporary liquidity issue. My assets are tied up." "Tied up in fraud judgments," I interjected. 3 of them, totaling over $2 million. Maya pulled her arm away from him as if he were burning hot. She looked at the evidence bag again. Then she looked at Frank. "Dad," she whimpered, "you said they were important people." Frank looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw total defeat in his eyes. He looked at the daughter he had bullied and dismissed, and then at the important people who were currently being read their Miranda rights in his borrowed dining room. They told me the video was fake," Frank whispered. "They lied to you, Dad," I said softly. "Just like they lied about their money, just like they lied about caring about you. They were using you to get to me, to get to Mom's jewelry." Richard lunged, not at me but at the back door. "Grab him," Miller shouted. The officers tackled Richard before he made it 3 steps. He went down hard, knocking over a tray of mimosas. Glass shattered. Champagne soaked into the expensive rug. Joyce screamed as an officer cuffed her hands behind her back. "This is a mistake. Do you know who we are?" Joyce wailed as they were hauled toward the door. "Yeah," Miller said, holding the door open. "You're the people who stole from a dead woman." They dragged them out. The silence left in their wake was deafening. Maya stood in the middle of the room, tears streaming down her face, staring at the empty spot where her husband had been. Frank slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "My jewelry," I said, walking over to the table and picking up the evidence bag. "I'll take this back now." Maya looked up at me. "Amelia, I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said, "but you should have listened." The fallout was swift and brutal. Richard and Joyce didn't make bail. With their flight risk status and the mounting fraud charges from other states, the judge denied it. They were looking at 5 to 10 years in prison. Their assets were frozen, their estate seized by the bank. Maya filed for an annulment the next day. It turned out their marriage wasn't even legal in our state due to a paperwork error Richard had handled. She was free, but she was broken. She moved back in with Frank, but the dynamic had shifted. She wasn't the golden child anymore. She was a survivor of a con, and she was humbled. As for Frank, I went over to his house a week later. The negotiation suit was gone. He was wearing an old cardigan, sitting in his den with the lights off. "Amelia," he said, not looking up, I don't know what to say." "Start with 'I'm sorry,'" I suggested, sitting opposite him. He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "I'm sorry. I was so caught up in the idea of them, of what they represented. I wanted to believe we were part of that world. I wanted Maya to be safe." "You wanted status, Dad," I corrected him. "And you were willing to sacrifice my safety and my home to get it. You let them into my bedroom. You gave them the key." "I know," he whispered. "I know." "I'm changing the locks," I said. "And the alarm code. You're not coming over uninvited anymore. And you're never, ever asking me for money again." He nodded. "I understand." "And the jewelry," I added. "It stays in a bank vault now. You don't get to see it. You don't get to talk about it." "Okay," he said. I stood up. "I'm going to help Maya find a lawyer for the annulment. I'm going to help her get a job, but I'm doing it on my terms, not yours." I walked out of his house and into the crisp autumn air. I drove to my own home, my sanctuary. I walked inside. It was quiet. The cameras were still running, but there was no one to watch but me. I went to the closet, opened the safe, and placed the evidence bag inside. I took out the ruby pendant and held it in my hand. It felt heavy, cool, and real. "We got them, Mom," I whispered. I put it on, fastening the clasp around my neck. I looked in the mirror. Our roar, I didn't see a victim. I didn't see a scapegoat. I saw a woman who had defended her home, her legacy, and her dignity. The important people were in a cell. The golden child was starting over, and the pushover. She was just getting started.